All right, welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. You know, we're always digging into the latest health and wellness research, and today we're diving deep into something pretty incredible that's going on inside all of us as we speak, actually.
It really is remarkable.
It's brown adipose tissue, or BAT for short. I like to think of it as like a hidden metabolic furnace. This is not your average fat, folks.
Right, exactly. It's this special kind of fat that actually burns calories and generates heat. It's amazing, really.
Pretty cool, right? And for this deep dive, we've got a ton of fascinating research laid out in front of us, recent studies, expert reviews, all that good stuff. We're going to unpack exactly how B is built, how it works its magic, at the cellular level, the hormones that affect it, practical things you might be able to do to maybe, give it a boost. And we're even going to touch on some intriguing connections, maybe a little less direct, but connections to how your body's aligned, something you might have heard of as Yugami.
Absolutely. And we'll explore all of that. I think people will be surprised by just how much research there is on DT and how much we're still learning about it.
Right. It's a hot topic, so to speak.
Yeah, pun intended.
So really, by the end of this, our goal is for you to walk away, or I guess sit back and relax and walk away with a solid understanding of this metabolic player, BT. No science overload here. We want to keep things clear and engaging so you can grasp the potential of this and how it might actually play a part in your overall health and well-being.
That's the goal. We want to empower people with knowledge, but in a way that's digestible and hopefully even a little bit fun.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's dive in.
Sounds good.
So first things first, where is this BT? Where can we find it in the body?
So in us grown-up folks, the main spots you'll find BT are kind of clustered around the upper chest and neck, like right around your collarbone.
Okay, so the upper chest area.
That's called the supraclavicular region if you want to get technical.
Very technical. I like it.
But it doesn't stop there. You'll find some along the spine that's called the paravertebral area. Also near the heart pericardial and a little bit above the kidneys, the suprarenal region.
Interesting. So it's not like concentrated in just one place. It's kind of spread out.
It is.
Yeah.
And interestingly, when we're born as babies, we actually have a lot more BAT than we do as adults.
Oh, really?
Yeah, particularly between our shoulder blades in that interscapular region and around the kidneys, that perirenal area we talked about.
Makes you wonder why, right?
It does. And it's thought that this extra BAT in babies helps them regulate their body temperature since their systems aren't fully developed yet.
Right. Makes sense. They can't just put on a sweater.
Exactly. And it's worth pointing out, the actual amount of BAT each person has, well, it can be pretty different. It's highly variable between individuals, so there's no normal amount, really.
So we're not all starting with the same amount of this internal furnace. Now, on a very basic level, what's the difference between this brown fat BT and the regular white fat we typically think of, when we think of fat?
That's a great question, and it's really key to understand how BAT works. So brown fat cells, they're called adipocytes. Well, they're actually smaller than white fat cells.
Oh, smaller. Interesting.
Yeah, and they're packed with these little tiny droplets of fat. Multiple droplets, hence the term multilocular, which just means many compartments.
Ah, so many little pockets of fat within the cell itself.
Precisely. And they've also got a good amount of cytoplasm.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the cell's internal workspace where all the action happens, and tons of mitochondria. Remember those from biology class?
Oh, yeah, the powerhouses of the cell, the energy factories.
Exactly. So more mitochondria in brown fat basically translates to more energy burning going on.
Ah, so it's like a high energy cell compared to white fat.
It is. It is. And here's the really crucial part. These mitochondria in BAT, they have this unique protein called uncoupling protein 1, or UCP1.
UCP1.
This protein is what gives brown fat its special heat-generating superpower.
So that's the key difference right there.
It really is. Now, white adipose tissue, that's your regular white fat, it's got larger cells, for one thing.
Okay, larger cells.
Yeah, and each cell has just one big fat droplet inside. So unilocular, meaning single compartment. And crucially, it has way fewer mitochondria and very little, if any, of that UCP1.
So white fat is more about storing energy, while brown fat is about burning it off.
Exactly. White fat's main job is to store those triglycerides, which are just a fancy name for fat molecules. It's like your body's energy savings account, whereas brown fat is more like your checking account, actively burning energy, potentially contributing to a healthier weight.
And that's a pretty big takeaway for anyone listening who's trying to manage their weight or their metabolism.
Absolutely. It's a really important distinction to make.
Now, I've also come across the terms beige fat or bright fat. Where do these fit in? Are they like brown fat, white fat, or something else entirely?
Beige or bright and bright actually stands for brown and white adipocytes. They're really interesting.
So a bit of both?
You could say that.
Mm-hmm.
They look and act kind of like brown fat, meaning they've got those multiple small fat droplets, and they can actually produce that UCP1 protein. So they can generate heat, but here's the catch. You find them sprinkled within the white fat deposits.
Ah, hiding out amongst the white fat.
Right. And what's even cooler is they can be recruited, meaning certain signals can actually trigger those white fat cells to transform into these beige fat cells.
Wow, so our body can actually create more of these heat-generating cells. That's pretty amazing.
It is, and it suggests we might have more control over our beat than we initially thought. And you can look for some specific genes to see if these cells are brown or beige.
Oh, like what kind of genes?
Well, ones like UCP1, that's the key uncoupling protein we talked about, as well as CID and PGC1A. These genes show up in both brown and beige fat cells, kind of like a fingerprint, indicating their shared ability to burn off energy as heat.
So even within those white fat stores, there's potential for heat generation. That's pretty cool.
It is. It's like having hidden reserves of metabolic power waiting to be activated.
All right, let's get into the nitty-gritty now. How does BAT actually get activated? What's the main signal that turns on this internal furnace, so to speak?
Well, the primary trigger is your sympathetic nervous system, or SNS.
Okay, the SNS.
Think of it as your body's automatic fight-or-flight response system.
So when we're stressed, our SNS kicks in. But how does that relate to BAT?
Well, one of the most potent natural triggers for the SNS, and therefore for beat activation, is, believe it or not, cold exposure.
Cold exposure. That makes sense, I guess. When we're cold, we shiver to generate heat. But it sounds like BA is another way our body warms up.
Exactly. Shivering is a quick, immediate response, but bead is more of a sustained metabolic heat generator.
So what happens inside those bait cells when we get cold? Walk us through it.
All right, so when your SNS senses that drop in temperature, that you're cold, it releases this chemical messenger, norepinephrine.
Norepinephrine.
It's like a signal flare. And this norepinephrine, it travels to the BAT cells and binds to specific receptors on those cells. The most important ones are called May3 adrenergic receptors.
Beta-3 adrenergic receptors. Got it. So norepinephrine is the key, basically.
It is. And this binding, like a key fitting into a lock, that's what starts this whole cascade of events inside the bait cell.
And this cascade leads to heat production, right?
Exactly. It's like dominoes falling, one after another.
Mm.
So first, this binding triggers the breakdown of those stored triglycerides, those little fat droplets, into long-chain fatty acids.
Mm.
This process is called lipolysis, the breakdown of fats.
So we're releasing fuel, essentially, for the furnace.
Precisely. But those fatty acids, they're not just fuel. They also play a really direct role in the heat generation.
Oh, so they're not just burning, they're doing something else.
They are. So these long-chain fatty acids, they go on to activate that special UCP1 protein inside the mitochondria. You remember the uncoupling protein?
Right, UCP1, the one that white fat doesn't have much of.
Exactly. And what UCP1 does is pretty wild. See, normally, mitochondria use energy from breaking down fuel to create ATP, the cell's primary energy currency.
Right, ATP, the stuff that powers everything.
But UCP1 sort of throws a wrench in the gears. It allows protons, which are these tiny particles involved in ATP production, to leak across the inner membrane of the mitochondria.
So it's like poking holes in the energy factory.
Kind of, yeah,
Right.
but in a good way.
Yeah.
So instead of all that energy being converted into ATP, it gets released as heat.
Ah, so it's deliberately bypassing the energy production to create warmth instead.
Exactly. It's a very specific, very efficient way of turning fuel into heat.
That's incredible. So how many calories are we talking about here? Does activating BAT really make a noticeable difference?
Well, there have been studies on that. One study found that healthy young adults who were exposed to like a mild chill around 19 degrees Celsius for just 2 hours, they burned, on average, extra 410 calories that day.
Wow, 410 calories. That's a significant amount. That's like, what a good workout.
It is. It really highlights how much energy BT can burn when it's activated.
So maybe turning down the thermostat a little bit could actually help us burn more calories.
It's possible. And since BT is so metabolically active, it needs a good supply of oxygen and fuel, right?
That makes sense.
So it's actually very well supplied with blood vessels. It's highly vascularized. And when BEAD is activated, blood flow to those areas increases, to deliver all the oxygen and nutrients it needs.
That makes sense. So it's not just some passive tissue, it's a dynamic part of our metabolism. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about hormones. We know hormones play a huge role in regulating all sorts of bodily functions. What kind of hormonal influences are at play when it comes to BT?
Well, there are several hormones that interact with BHOs. We've already talked about norepinephrine and how it kicks off that whole activation cascade through beta-adrenergic signaling.
Right, norepinephrine is like the signal from the nervous system.
Exactly. And that signaling pathway is not only key for activating the beta we already have, but it can also promote the browning of white fat into beige fat, like we talked about earlier.
So more beige fat, more calorie burning potential.
Precisely. And there are actually medications called beta-adrenergic agonists. One example is mirabegron that can basically mimic what norepinephrine does.
Oh, so they can activate beta even without cold exposure.
They can, and they can also induce that browning of white fat. And studies have shown that mirabegron can boost energy expenditure by, on average, about 200 calories a day.
Interesting. So there are pharmaceutical ways to target this system. Now, what about other common hormones we hear about, like thyroid hormone, GLP-1, insulin? Are they involved in the BATE story?
They are, to some extent. Thyroid hormone, for example, it plays a role in regulating our overall energy balance. And there's research suggesting that it can influence beat activity through some pretty complex pathways.
Complex.
Yeah, involving a protein called hypothalamic AMPK and the way our bodies process fats.
So thyroid hormone might be playing a behind-the-scenes role in beat function.
It seems that way. Now, GLP-1, or glucagon-like peptide 1, that's a hormone that's super important for regulating blood sugar levels.
Right, GLP-1.
And while its receptors, the places where it binds, aren't found in huge amounts directly on white or brown fat cells, there's some evidence that certain medications that work like GLP-1, called GLP-1 agonists.
Which are often used for diabetes and weight management, right?
Exactly. Well, some of these medications, they've shown some interesting effects on B, even if it's not a direct effect. Like one study found that a GLP-1 agonist actually increased glucose uptake in beet.
So it's helping beet use glucose more efficiently.
It seems that way. And it's thought that this might be due to improvements in insulin sensitivity in that tissue, even if the overall calorie burning didn't necessarily skyrocket.
So it's like GLP-1 agonists might have these sort of ripple effects that benefit BAT metabolism, even if it's not their primary target.
Right, exactly.
Interesting. And speaking of insulin sensitivity, how does active BAT relate to that?
Well, in general, active BAT is associated with better insulin sensitivity.
So the more active your BAT is, the better your body responds to insulin.
Right. And remember, cold exposure, which we know fires up BAT, has also been shown to improve insulin sensitivity.
That's a pretty significant connection, given that so many people struggle with insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes.
It is, it is. And there's even some research suggesting that blocking the action of certain hormones like aldosterone, using what are called mineralocorticoid antagonists, might enhance BAT function in humans.
So the hormonal interplay with BAT is quite complex.
It is, and we're still learning about all the intricate connections.
All right, so we've got this amazing internal furnace, and we know some of the things that influence it. But the big question on everyone's mind is, how can we activate our own BAT? What are some practical things we can do in our daily lives?
Well, the most straightforward and well-researched way to activate BT is, like we've discussed, cold exposure. And this doesn't have to mean taking ice baths every day, although some people do swear by that.
Maybe not for everyone.
Right. Even short bursts of cold can be effective.
Yeah.
Studies have looked at different approaches, like spending a couple of hours in temperatures around 16 to 18 degrees Celsius, or longer periods, maybe 5 to 8 hours in similar temperatures, and even just regular repeated exposure to mild or cold seems to make a difference.
So maybe turning down the thermostat a few degrees or taking a cool shower could help?
It could. It could. The key takeaway here is that consistency and repeated exposure, that seems to be really important for potentially increasing bead activity over time.
So it's not about one extreme session, it's about building up that tolerance and activating it regularly.
Right, exactly.
Now, what about exercise? We know it's good for us in so many ways. Does it also stimulate our brown fat?
It does seem to play a role. Exercise, it boosts your sympathetic nervous system activity, which, as we know, is a major driver of BAT activation.
Right, that fight or flight response.
Exactly. And on top of that, when you exercise, your body releases certain molecules like irisin, FGF21, and cardiac natriuretic peptides.
Lots of big words.
I know. But these are all signaling molecules that have been shown to activate BAT and promote the browning of white fat.
So they're like little messengers telling our bodies to turn up the heat.
Exactly. However, there's still some debate about the direct impact of exercise on BAT activity. Some studies have shown clear effects, while others have been less conclusive. It might be that exercise affects BAT more indirectly through these broader metabolic changes.
So exercise is likely a good thing for BAT, even if the exact mechanisms are still being worked out. Now, I know a lot of people are curious about diet. Are there specific foods or nutrients that can influence the BAT activity?
There is some interesting research in this area. For instance, fish oil, which is a good source of those omega-3 fatty acids, has been shown in animal studies to increase what's called diet-induced thermogenesis.
Thermogenesis meaning heat production, right?
Exactly. And this finding suggests that fish oil might have some connection to BAT activity, though more research is needed in humans. Then there are capsaicinoids, which are these non-pungent compounds similar to capsaicin, the stuff that makes chili peppers hot.
So they can turn up the heat in our bodies without the burning sensation.
Precisely. And studies in humans have shown that capsaicinoids can increase calorie burning through BAT activation.
Interesting. So maybe a little spice in our diet could be a good thing.
It's possible. And even the catechins found in tea, those beneficial compounds along with caffeine, those have been shown to activate BAT and enhance the body's ability to generate heat in response to cold.
Wow, so a cup of tea or coffee could actually be helping us warm up from the inside out.
It could be. And there are a couple of other interesting molecules, BMP7 and FGF21, that have been shown to promote brown fat development and function in studies.
But those are not something we can easily influence through diet, right?
Not really. They're more in the realm of ongoing research and potential future therapies, not something you can just eat more of.
Right, those are exciting areas of research, but not something we can directly control right now through lifestyle. So we've got cold exposure, exercise, maybe some spicy foods, and tea. What about the bigger picture? How does BAT activity relate to our overall body composition and metabolic health?
Well, the research is pretty clear on this. People with more active BAT tend to have lower levels of visceral fat.
And visceral fat is that fat that's stored around our organs, right?
It is, and it's the type of fat that's linked to a lot of health problems.
So less visceral fat is definitely a good thing.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that BAT activity is also linked to higher levels of subcutaneous fat.
Subcutaneous fat, that's the fat under our skin, right?
Exactly. And having a higher ratio of subcutaneous fat to visceral fat is generally considered healthier.
So boosting your BAT might actually help you shift your body composition in a more favorable direction.
That's what the research suggests.
That's pretty remarkable. Now, what about other markers of metabolic health, like blood sugar, cholesterol, things like that?
Well, studies have found that people with detectable BAT activity tend to have healthier levels of those markers.
Healthier in what way?
Well, they tend to have lower blood glucose levels, lower white blood cell counts, which could indicate less inflammation, lower triglyceride levels, and higher HDL cholesterol, the good kind.
So having active BAT seems to correlate with a whole host of metabolic benefits.
It really does. And there's even some evidence that having detectable BAT is associated with a lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes.
That's pretty powerful evidence for the importance of BAT. Now, what about people who are already struggling with obesity? Is their BAT any different?
There's research suggesting that in individuals with obesity, the blood flow to BAT and its ability to use glucose in response to cold are often reduced compared to lean individuals.
So their BAT might not be working as efficiently.
That's what the research suggests. However, and this is really encouraging, even in those with initially low or even undetectable BAT activity, it seems like it's possible to reactivate and recruit this tissue through various stimulations.
So even if you're starting with less active BAT, there's still potential to turn things around.
Exactly. And some studies have shown that this reactivation can actually contribute to reductions in body fat.
That's really hopeful. Now, let's talk about something a little bit different. The idea of Yugami and its potential connection to BAT.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
So Yugami, it's basically a Japanese term that refers to body misalignment, or what we might call poor posture.
Right, and it's this idea that misalignments in the body can actually impact how our systems function.
Okay, so how might this relate to our brown fat?
Well, it's important to point out that the direct connection isn't super clear-cut in the research we've looked at, but there are some really interesting potential links based on what we know about anatomy and physiology.
So more of a hypothetical link at this point.
Exactly. But the thinking goes like this. poor posture and body misalignment could potentially affect nerve function and circulation throughout the body.
Makes sense. If things aren't aligned properly, it could affect how signals travel.
Right. And since we know that the sympathetic nervous system is crucial for activating beat, any disruption to those nerve signals could theoretically impact how well beat gets stimulated.
So it's like if the communication lines are down, the signal to activate beat might not get through as strongly.
Exactly. And the location of some bat depots adds another layer to this idea.
Oh, how so?
Well, those paravertebral bat depots, the ones that run along your spine, they're really close to the spinal cord and the sympathetic ganglia, which are those clusters of nerve cells that are part of the SNS.
So there's a physical proximity there that suggests a possible connection.
There is. And there have actually been some older studies in animals like guinea pigs and dogs where researchers found that locally warming up the spinal cord actually suppressed shivering.
Wow. So temperature changes in the spinal cord can affect the body's heat regulation mechanisms.
It seemed that way. And this leads to a really interesting question. Could maintaining better posture, better body alignment, actually optimize the nervous system's ability to send those activating signals to Bay? It's definitely something to think about.
It's a fascinating connection, even if it's not fully proven yet. It really highlights how interconnected our body systems are.
It does. Our structural alignment, our nervous system, our metabolism,
Yeah.
they're all intertwined in ways we're still uncovering.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground today. Before we wrap up, let's recap some of the key takeaways about Bay.
Sure. So we've learned that Bay is this metabolically active tissue that can significantly increase our energy expenditure through non-shivering thermogenesis.
It's like a calorie-burning furnace we all have inside us.
Exactly. And cold exposure is a powerful way to activate it. Exercise and certain dietary components like those found in fish oil, capsaicinoids, and tea also seem to play a role.
So there are things we can do in our everyday lives to give our Bay tea a boost.
Absolutely. And what's really exciting is that Bay tea activity is linked to a healthier body composition, particularly less of that harmful visceral fat and improvements in key metabolic markers like blood sugar and cholesterol levels.
So it's not just about burning a few extra calories, it's about improving our overall metabolic health.
Right.
And I think a big takeaway here is that it's not about finding one magic solution. It's about taking a holistic approach to our health. Moving our bodies, being mindful of our environment, and understanding how our amazing metabolism works.
I completely agree. It's about making those small, consistent changes that can have a big impact over time.
So here is a final thought to leave you with. We know that BD is located near the spine and that the nervous system plays a huge role in activating it. So how might other lifestyle factors that impact our nervous system, things like stress management techniques or practices like yoga or Tai Chi that promote mindful movement, how might those things indirectly influence our body? It's a connection worth exploring.
It is. And it reminds us that there's so much we still don't know, but that there's always more to discover about our own bodies.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into brown adipose tissue. We hope you learned some valuable information today. And as always, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep taking care of yourself.
That's the best advice anyone can give.
We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.